If you finish a hard lifting session and jump straight into a cold plunge because it feels like it's helping you recover and grow, the research on that specific habit says something uncomfortable. Feeling recovered and actually adapting are not the same thing, and cold water immersion appears to help with one while working against the other. Cold plunging gets used as a catch-all term for what? There's cold water immersion as a way to feel less sore after a workout. There's cold water immersion used immediately after training, specifically for its effect on the long-term adaptations that training produces, meaning real muscle growth and strength gains over weeks and months. And there's cold water immersion as a general wellness practice, credited with improving mood, immune function, and metabolism. These are 3 different outcomes tested in 3 different ways, and the evidence for one tells you almost nothing about the other 2. Most of the confusion comes from a simple substitution. Soreness relief is easy to feel, so people generalize "it made me feel better" into "it must be helping everything." The wellness claims follow a similar pattern. A striking number from one small physiology study gets pulled out of context and marketed as proof of a mental health or fat loss effect, when the original study never measured mood or body fat at all. Neither of these leaps is dishonest exactly. The underlying data points are usually real, but they get stretched much further than the original research supports. Here's the physiology that explains why soreness relief and muscle growth can move in opposite directions. Resistance training creates mechanical tension and metabolic stress in the muscle fibers you're working. This is the direct physical stimulus that triggers growth. Part of the response to that stimulus is a wave of local inflammation and increased blood flow. Immune cells move in, swelling increases, and growth signaling pathways inside the muscle cells switch on. That inflammatory response isn't a side effect to be minimized, it's part of the trigger. Cold water immersion works largely through vasoconstriction, meaning it narrows blood vessels and reduces blood flow to the area. That's exactly what you'd want if your only goal is dulling the swelling and nerve signals that produce the sensation of soreness. But the same reduced blood flow and dampened inflammatory signaling also appears to blunt the biological trigger that tells the muscle fiber to rebuild bigger. It's a bit like disabling a smoke alarm because the noise is annoying. The room does get quieter, but fewer of the repair crew show up, because the alarm was also the call that summoned them. The soreness relief evidence is the most consistent part of this picture. A recent meta-analysis pooling 20 controlled trials and around 400 participants found cold water immersion produced a moderate reduction in perceived soreness immediately after exercise and a smaller reduction at 24 hours, but that benefit had disappeared by 48 hours. The same review found a modest drop in creatine kinase, a blood marker of muscle damage, at 24 hours, but no measurable change in 2 of the most common inflammation markers, and no consistent improvement in jump-based performance testing. So, a real short-lived comfort benefit, not a documented acceleration of tissue repair. The interference evidence is where things get more relevant for anyone training seriously. A 12-week trial found that active recovery produced a 17% increase in fast-twitch muscle fiber size, while the cold water immersion group showed no significant increase at all. The cold water group also showed blunted activation of satellite cells and a key growth signaling enzyme in the day or 2 after training, which are part of the machinery that builds new muscle protein. A more recent meta-analysis pooling 8 studies on hypertrophy found the same direction of effect, a small reduction in muscle growth with post-exercise cold water immersion, though the statistical range on that estimate technically touches 0, and the researchers noted the underlying studies were only fair to poor quality, so this should be read as a likely effect rather than a certain one. A separate meta-analysis of 8 studies found a larger and more statistically decisive effect specifically on strength. Maximal strength gains were reduced with regular cold water immersion, and so were explosive, ballistic strength gains, while aerobic endurance performance was unaffected. 2 independent research teams, 2 different meta-analyses, the same conclusion. Cold water immersion appears to cost you strength and size gains without costing you cardio fitness. Now to the wellness claims, starting with the one behind most of the cold plunges boost dopamine content you've probably seen. A study found that 1 hour of whole-body immersion at a very cold temperature raised blood noradrenaline by over 500% and dopamine by around 250% in young men, alongside a huge jump in metabolic rate. That's a real, well-documented acute stress response, but it's a blood chemistry measurement taken during a 1-hour cold exposure, not a study of mood, motivation, or mental health over time. When a much larger and more recent systematic review pooled 11 randomized trials and over 3,000 participants, specifically looking at mood outcomes, it found no significant effect, rating confidence in most outcomes as low, though it did note some improvement in self-reported sleep quality and general well-being. The mechanism is real. The mood claim built on top of it isn't well supported yet. On immune function, the largest relevant trial randomized just over 3,000 working adults to a daily cold shower of 30, 60, or 90 seconds, or a warm shower control for 30 days, and found the cold shower groups self-reported 29% fewer sick days than controls. That sounds like a clear immune benefit until you look closer. The number of actual illness episodes people reported didn't differ between groups at all. Only the number of days people chose to call in sick went down. Combined with the fact that this was unblinded and entirely self-reported, the more honest read is that cold showers likely didn't reduce infections. They may have changed people's threshold for staying home, which looks more like a psychological or motivational effect than an immune one. On fat loss, there's a real mechanism worth knowing about. A controlled study found that mild cold exposure activated metabolically active brown fat tissue in the vast majority of young men tested, and that people with lower body mass index and body fat had more active brown fat and a higher resting metabolic rate. That's a legitimate calorie-burning tissue that cold can recruit. What it doesn't show is that a few minutes in an ice bath a few times a week produces meaningful fat loss. The exposure used in that research was sustained mild cold over an extended period, not a brief plunge, and no study has yet closed the gap between this tissue activates and this produces a noticeable amount of fat loss at the exposure levels most people actually use. One more thing worth separating from the debate about effectiveness. Cold water immersion triggers a well-documented cold shock response, an involuntary rapid spike in breathing rate, heart rate, and blood pressure the moment cold water hits the skin. That's a meaningfully bigger workload on the heart, and health organizations specifically caution people with an existing heart condition against sudden cold immersion without medical clearance, since even healthy winter swimmers have shown elevated cardiac stress markers after cold water swims. So here's how to actually use this. If your main goal is building muscle or strength, which if you're lifting seriously, it probably is, the evidence moderately to strongly supports keeping cold water immersion away from the same window as your resistance training, especially on the muscles you just worked. If you enjoy it, push it several hours away from your lifting session, or save it for cardio days and true rest days, where this specific interference concern doesn't apply. If your goal is simply feeling less sore and more comfortable, not maximizing muscle growth, a brief cold plunge after a hard session is a reasonable, evidence-supported choice for that specific purpose. Just understand the benefit is real but fades within about 2 days. If you're doing it for a morning routine, mental toughness, or stress management, the most defensible finding is a possible reduction in one stress marker several hours later. Treat it as a habit you personally enjoy, not a proven mental health treatment. If you're hoping it burns meaningful fat on its own, the current evidence doesn't support that from short, occasional exposures. The mechanism is real, the outcome at that dose isn't proven. And if you have any cardiac history, uncontrolled blood pressure, or take medication that affects heart rate or blood pressure, get cleared by a physician before regular cold immersion, and never do it alone in open water. Cold water can genuinely take the edge off soreness for a day. It just can't take credit for the muscle you're trying to build, or the mood, immunity, and fat loss claims riding along with it. Follow Exercise Scholar for the fitness and nutrition truth nobody else is giving you.